Future Hacker. Life. Path. Future.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Future Hacker. I'm your host, Maria Taide, and today we're talking to Rasmus Rasmusson. Rasmus is an experienced entrepreneur and product developer with more than 20 years in the IT industry. He's currently developing 2 startups, an IoT engineering company focused on cooking automation systems, which he completely pivoted during the COVID, and the world's first co-factory, which is basically the coworking for factories. So today we're going to learn the stories about those 2 businesses. Hi, Rasmus. How are you doing? It's great to have you with us today.
Thank you. I'm doing well.
So, guys, Rasmus is the type of person that has always been ahead of his time. Back in 97, he had this screen sharing startup. Can you imagine the solution today? So as he mentioned to me, being ahead is not always a good thing for entrepreneurs, especially when you're looking for funding. So Rasmus, can you please share your story and some of the challenges you faced?
Sure. So I started in 97 it started as a web design company, but we quickly pivoted over to a web screen sharing company. And interesting, this was so long ago, it was so early that people didn't understand what we were doing. They were like, is this a virus? They thought it was like magic. Now, because this is before Skype. So it was a bit challenging to explain to people that you can actually use the computer in conferencing. This seems crazy today, right? But it was a long time ago. But we managed to get some funding, but it was hard you first have to explain it's possible. You can actually use the computer for conferencing. You couldn't use the voice at the same time, but you could dial in on a regular phone. That was challenging. And then I joined a company that already had funding, an e-learning company in early 2000s. I joined them and worked with marketing. And this was also ahead of its time because e-learning didn't really happen until a decade later. So this was an English teaching company, and they had live classes online. Also not so strange today. But then I worked with banner advertisements and email marketing, and we wrote copy that was like sort of live teachers. And people kept thinking it was schools. They thought they booked the class to go to a school and go. They were like, I booked it, I paid for it. Where's the class? So you had that in both the conference system and this one, though investors could understand it. It was hard to convince the public because you first have to explain what it is, that it works, and then buy our product. So I think being ahead of your time in those 2 occasions were a bit challenging. And then I started my own company, my smart oven company. And once again, I found myself years ahead of where the market is because the kitchen appliance industry is notoriously conservative. It's very small iterations, so small improvements to the products. And so here I went around with a product that is like way ahead. And then people were like, what is this? It understands me. It connects to the cloud. It opens the door automatically. A bunch of things that people couldn't really comprehend. I like innovation, and I like to think not just one iteration ahead, but multiple iterations ahead. And then you end up there, which is sometimes good and sometimes bad. People typically say, you have sort of first mover advantage, which I think is not true. It's actually the ones that come after that. They learn from the first movers that will make it, if you think about search engines, for example, or e-commerce. So I'm not sure it's always the best to be the first, but it's fun. It's fun from an R&D perspective.
Yeah, for sure, there's a lot of learning in the process, but I agree with you because it's not only about teaching people about, whatever new you're bringing to the market. Usually people are suspicious about things, and also discovering firsthand the challenges instead of already working on a business that is already known and already being ready for the challenges by looking at the first mover, right?
Right, yeah. When you read IT news and such, people with ideas such as mine often get lots of attention. So you get the thinking that this is what startups should be. But in fact, I think often it's more conservative innovators that really make it. I'm not going to denounce innovation. I certainly love it. And there's so many examples of great innovators that do really well. But I think it's a little bit, the media is a bit too focused on sort of, for good reasons, right? Because you don't want to hear the same story again. But they're focused on sort of the newest. So especially in the early days of internet, it was just crazy. The dumbest ideas were floating around. And we see a little bit the same now within IoT, that it's just really dumb ideas that sort of get funded because they get media attention and investors don't really understand them, but they think it's kind of cool or something like that. So I think, that's kind of what led to the dot-com crash in the early 2000s. That was just a bit too much hype around the new and not so much. So I think I constantly have that against me. And I question myself, am I really just coming up with one of these dot-com ideas again? Or is this actually, does it have substance? So I've been very careful with these companies to really come at it from sort of a needs perspective rather than, oh, look what we can do with tech. Let's go and find a problem to solve with this solution, which is the typical engineering way of dealing with innovation.
Yes, and I think that resilience is the word as well, right? So Rasmus, the speed of innovation and its adoption, especially in China, is pretty amazing, right? So, and by the way, I forgot to tell the listeners that Rasmus you're based in China, right? And it turned to be that it's the new must-go destination besides Silicon Valley for entrepreneurs and any company looking for the next disruption. So, you are an innovator. It seems that you're pretty much in the right place. So how is it to be an entrepreneur in China? It's actually the first time we are covering that. So, anything you could share, it would be amazing.
So China is obviously a very fast-moving market, especially the domestic market is growing really quickly. And I think it's already larger than the US domestic. And it's also very fast adoption rate of new technology. Now, people often think that the US is so fast at adopting, whereas in China, it goes really quick throughout the nation. So mobile payments went from, it was a cash society and it went to a mobile payment society in a few years. And now we see the same thing with IoT. So it went from nothing to be like everyone wants IoT products. And so that's obviously a very interesting environment to work in as an entrepreneur. And it's also a tremendous belief in the future among Chinese people, because they see their salaries just constantly increase. There hasn't been any depression here. We went through COVID, for example, in a couple of months, and the markets just opened up again after 2 months. It was barely here. And then, it's still here, but it hasn't really affected the business and the life very much. So I think it's a very dynamic environment. And you can also feel it when I've been in China now for 18 years, and it's sort of around you constantly. And when you live in the big cities, it's just that you're on a wave, basically. That's tremendously encouraging. I know people here who have been working in Silicon Valley, and I think it's a similar environment. So our office for my smart oven company is in Shenzhen, which is sort of the Silicon Valley, but for IoT products. That's also really good to be there because that's difficult anywhere else to build hardware if you're not near factories and suppliers. Now, on the flip side, being a foreigner in China is that first, the language barrier. Even though I've been here so long, my Chinese isn't very good. That's challenging. But the other part is that Chinese people, like many other countries, believe that their country is so complicated to understand for foreigners. So I've worked on marketing. I have more experience selling things to Chinese people than most Chinese people. So investors are still like, well, you're not Chinese. You don't really understand Chinese people. That part is very annoying. It's hard to raise money here, for example. It's hard to, you're always met with skepticism. Sometimes I feel that people are a bit small-minded. So I come in and say, it doesn't matter if you think I can handle China, because we're building a global company. So if you're going to constantly think that, you just have to be domestic, then how can you create like the future of, the next Google? When you say that, some investors get it. They're like, oh yeah, that's true. So you still have that they're very sort of inward focused. There's mostly positive things, obviously, since I live here, but there are some challenges.
Yeah, that's a great background. Thank you. So let's talk about one of your startups, Warm. It's on the IoT segment for kitchen appliances. So you basically built this connected oven for people that knows nothing about cooking, but would like to keep a healthy diet by prepping their food at home in this very, very practical way. And usually they live in very, very small homes, right? So as you said, it's basically the self-driving car of the oven. So first of all, what made you enter this segment? Were you trying to solve a pain that you were feeling yourself, or was it more like this niche that you identified?
Partly it was my own need because I cook always. I cook a lot. And ovens hardly moved innovation-wise since the 50s, The last development was the microwave oven, which was developed in the 50s. And after that, has been nothing. And they're so imprecise and slow, and they can only do one thing. It's just frustrating. But the other one was I experienced in working with the Chinese market. So when I worked with the Chinese millennials, which were the main customers of my previous company, I learned to know them quite well from sort of an analytical, but also because friends, I have lots of friends here. And you can see that it's a monumental shift between the older generation and the millennials. It's like massive, and they're so different. So one of those differences is that younger people cannot cook. Up till people who were born, who are 40 years plus, they cook, or women cook primarily. But then younger people, women work. And so they have that constant conflict with their mothers, especially. The mothers think you should be home, you should take care of your husband. And they're like, well, I have my career to think about. So nobody cooks. And that gave birth to a meal delivery industry that's really big here in China. But then I saw that opportunity. I see nobody cooks and they need to eat. This is a food culture. Food is important. You have that conflict. You have millennials that make more and more money and they don't have time to cook. They cannot cook. So that's sort of where the need of the market met my frustration with the limitations of cooking appliances. So yeah, I guess that's the background.
Yes, and then COVID happened and the way people behave changed as well, right? But then you saw this market opportunity in there and completely changed your business to address a pretty new market need that we would never have imagined before. So this is specifically a story I love. Can you please share with our listeners as well?
Yes, COVID changed everything for us. One thing we had done was to go towards the B2B market with our technology. On the consumer side, we had aimed for the upper middle class because we made a sort of expensive product. But then COVID happened, everything changed. And one of the things that changed is that people now were locked at home and they couldn't cook. And they were interested in cooking. They realized they don't know how to cook and they want to take some time to cook. So we thought, okay, here's a massive market opportunity for a cheaper version of our oven. So the first thing we did was to make a cheaper version that was sort of competing with the microwave oven. But we couldn't raise money because it's hard for us to raise money in China as we're foreigners and we couldn't travel. I thought COVID would disappear and we could just come out of COVID in April or so and we could then raise money with our mass market product that we have then developed. But that didn't happen because we couldn't travel. And so then we thought, okay, what do we do now? And the first thing we did was that we started trading with COVID products, and it was absolutely insane. In April and May, I mean, someone should write a book about that or make a movie about it because it was crazy. It was like cutthroat, pirates going on. People made like millions overnight. I remember one time I was on a call with a buyer in southern China and an accountant on the other hand. I asked my accountant, how can I put like $10 million in my account tomorrow? I was just insane for a while. Then after a while, we traded with that for a bit. And I thought, this cannot possibly continue. This is just not normal. So we started thinking, I don't want to do this trading anymore. It just felt wrong also, sort of capitalize on people's misery. So we started thinking, what happens next? And that's kind of what I'm good at, or at least what I enjoy doing. So we started thinking, okay, what's going to happen once everyone gets their face masks and their thermometers and these things? And so we thought, okay, we know thermometers and we know cloud technology through our oven product. So why don't we just make our own system that is designed for companies to do temperature testing? So now everyone's running around with thermometers, but it's just in like random people, like security guards. They don't know how to use it, or they know how to use it, but they don't want to be bothered if someone shows a temperature because then they have a lot of extra work. So we thought that needs to be monitored. There needs to be a compliance system. So then we created a series of cloud-connected thermometers that sends the data straight to the cloud. And then you can see centrally and monitor all the temperature testing that's happening in a city or in a school district or in a hotel, global hotel chains, whatever you want. And you can make sure that the testing is actually done, first of all. And if someone's failing or if there's incorrect testing, you can just call, you see who it is and where they are. So that's the system that we started developing during summer. And then we started selling it during the fall. And that's a long-term solution. We don't think we've talked back to hospitals and something that will kind of like a fire alarm.
That's a pretty great story, Rasmus. So listen, everybody, this is the end of the first episode. Keep listening that we're going to continue our conversation with Rasmus Rasmusson.
Future Hacker. Life. Path. Future.